The Power Rangers franchise in general is a bit of an oddity. It didn't start out as a remake, no. It actually dubbed over footage from the Japanese Super Sentai shows of the time, while adding some additional scenes for the American audiences. After a while, it took off, got its own Hollywood movie, and became a long-running children's series, even still going with versions to this day. That being said though, the most popular series to this day, by far, still has to be the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Which might explain why, so many years later, we've gotten a brand new Power Rangers movie. So in honor of that, I thought I'd bring it upon myself to talk about some of the old Mighty Morphin Power Rangers games, harkening back to the 16-bit era of gaming. Now, the franchise is predominantly known for its beat-em-up games, so much as even getting a new one released at the beginning of this year. But in my searching, I did manage to find something that wasn't one of those. And no, I'm not talking about the Sega CD game, because that... I just don't have it in me to talk about that right now. Today, I'm going to talk about a Power Rangers fighting game. Yeah, you heard that right, fighting game. Specifically, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition. I know the Sega Genesis and I guess also the Game Gear game were basically both fighting games, but I've chosen to instead focus specifically on the Fighting Edition for this video. Now without further ado, let's get right into it. Released on the Super Nintendo way back in September of 1995, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Fighting Edition, which I will henceforth refer to strictly as Fighting Edition, was presumably made to tie into the Hollywood movie of the same year, even going so far as having Ivan Ooze, the villain of that movie, being the final boss. Oddly enough, instead of featuring the Rangers fighting, like the Sega Genesis game did, all of the fighting is based entirely around Zords, possibly to differentiate it from the Sega Genesis game. The game got pretty mixed to negative reviews when it got released, and was seemingly forgotten for a while. But was it really that forgettable of a game, or is it more of a hidden gem? Let's dig in and see, shall we? First things first, let's take a look at the presentation. On startup, you are greeted with maybe the best 16-bit iterations of the Power Rangers theme that I may have ever heard, which you're currently hearing in the background. I was going to add more points for this, but it's the exact same as the one featured in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, the game, fuck me if I ever had to say that again, which came out 3 months prior. Actually, a lot of the music and sound effects are just recycled from that game, which is a bit of a shame really. Makes it clear that this game was just an afterthought. Graphically, we've got a bit of a mixed bag here. Most of the characters look fine, although the in-game animations aren't the best honestly. A lot of the actual battle animations are pretty choppy. Characters are easy to recognize from the show though, so it's all fine there. When you beat around in the story mode against one of the enemy monsters, you get a nice little animation of the enemy exploding as you either sheath your sword or cock your fist back in, depending on which Megazord you're playing as. It's not exactly the most elegant looking animation on the Super Nintendo, but I still think it's a nice touch. And I guess there's also the menus, but they're honestly mostly just a screen with a few measly options on them and some different colored lightning flashing behind them. Although I do have to say, the game's continue screen, which features Lord Zed in front of the Earth, which will actually explode if you don't choose continue, is actually really nice. There's also an opening cinematic, which is actually just half of the Thunder Megazord story mode intro, and then another cinematic for the Mega Tigazord story mode intro. Neither have any particular plot, and neither of them are particularly well done either. The only other thing to bring up are the stages, and again, it's a pretty mixed bag here. The stages are mostly just scattered locations from around Angel Grove, such as the mall, as well as Zed's lair and Zordon's command center. And while I do appreciate that trademark Mode 7 in the backgrounds that the Super Nintendo was so well known for, the stages themselves just aren't detailed enough or interesting at all, so it all just seems like a bit of a waste. And the animation in the back on some of the stages would be a welcome addition, but it's so few and far between, and again, it's uninteresting. Although, I do enjoy the way Zordon's face flaps back and forth so poorly on the Command Center stage. Get used to seeing that stage, by the way. You're gonna see it a lot. More on that later. And then there's the gameplay. But you know, for what it's worth, it really isn't horrible. Fighting Edition is, at the very least, a semi-competent fighting game. Each face button is mapped to a different attack, some being basic light punches while others are heavy attacks, as well as weapon-based attacks thrown in. And, in fighting game tradition, you hold the back button to block attacks. There are also special attacks using a quarter circle forward or back motion, but these posed a bit of a problem for me. You see, there's a special meter by your health bar, which I'm pretty sure you have to time your special attack with in order to initiate it, but I just couldn't do it. I don't know if it was the game, my emulator, or the controller I was using, but it just wasn't happening for me. While the controls may be pretty standard and competent, there is a glaring issue in the gameplay itself. The game is, how should I say this? It's not exactly slow, but there's definitely some delay in it. It's really sluggish. I did think this was just how I was emulating it, but after some quick research and watching a few other people's videos of this game, it definitely wasn't just me. This becomes a problem against some of the AI, as they can initiate their attacks faster even if your input's first, just because of this delay. Although, that usually isn't a problem because the AI is almost always a massive idiot, but it definitely is a hindrance, to say the least. The other thing I have to address is the characters. There's 9 playable characters in the game, one of which being a hidden character, which is Ivan Ooze, unlocked by holding the X and Y button together and pressing start on the character select screen. And while there are that many characters, only 2 of them are playable in the story mode, which is the aforementioned Thunder Megazord and Mega Tigerzord. In terms of game modes, there are only 3 in the game. There's story mode, which is basically just an arcade mode since there is no actual story. Fighting mode, which is your standard versus mode fare, and trial mode, which is basically just a survival mode. Basically, if you're only interested in a single fight, or you just want to play as a character other than the main 2 Zords, go to the versus mode. Or I guess you could test your skill with a survival mode if you really wanted. Both of these modes just kinda make the story mode pointless, considering there is no story to speak of here. And there is one other complaint I have. There may be 8 or 9 playable characters, but it is a bit of an issue that half of them are Zords. I mean, it's not exactly an issue really, but more of a grievance. Since you fight every character including the one you're playing as in story mode, meaning there are fights against Zords, that means you fight at Zordon's command center 4 times at least, since every Zord fights on that stage. This means that you hear the remix of the theme song constantly. While I do like this version of it, I'd be lying if I said it doesn't get mind-numbingly repetitive after a while. If there was at least one other stage to fight the Zords on to alleviate this, it would have been much better. Also, Shogun Megazord is pretty much unplayable because he is so goddamn slow. I don't care how hard he hits. Just thought I'd add that in there. But I did push through and beat the story mode as the Mega Tigerzord, which honestly wasn't all that difficult considering the game's shortcomings. It only took about 20-ish minutes, and I did honestly die a couple times. At the end, as I mentioned earlier, you go up against Ivan Ooze, and he is cheap as hell. Or at least, he's supposed to be. He did get me a few times, but that was before I figured out what this game was really playing at. Basically, Ooze was only playing with counters. Once I realized that, he was pathetically easy to beat. All I had to do was jump at him, hit him a couple of times, then hang back and block. He went down in no time. Once you beat him, you get an end screen that reads, and I couldn't make this up if I tried, "Morphenomenal." Seriously? It then prompted me to beat it on hard mode for a secret, but the secret is just the code to get Ivan Ooze, which I already knew. So thanks for that, internet research. All in all, this game is just kinda not good. If I had to pick a word to describe it, that word would probably just be meh. I wouldn't recommend it, even to die-hard Power Rangers fans. If anything, I should probably check out the Genesis game to see if that one's any better, but somehow I doubt it. This franchise only really made sense as a beat-em-up in the first place, I guess. This one can pretty much be avoided unless you really are that curious about it. I only checked it out because it wasn't a beat-em-up, honestly, and I didn't really feel like tackling that just yet. But there is one good thing that came of this. A year later, in 1996, Bandai recycled the engine for this game, releasing only in Japan. A Mobile Suit Gundam game called Gundam Wing Endless Duel was released. I don't know much about the Gundam franchise, so I don't know how faithful to the anime this game is, but I do know one thing. This game literally takes everything about Fighting Edition and perfects it, seriously. The graphics are great, animations are smooth, characters are diverse, and there's plenty to choose from, and they fixed the special meter to be more like a stamina meter, making super moves way easier and much more satisfying to pull off. This game is great, and maybe one day I'll take a more in-depth look at it. It may never have come out in the West, but there is an English fan translation out there, which is the file I downloaded. Check that out if you're interested. Now, normally this would be where I'd end the video. Unfortunately, since I did some research on this subject beforehand, I discovered something. An oddity, for sure, and I just had to talk about it a bit. I couldn't find much information about it, other than the fact that it exists, and it's presumed to be of Taiwanese origin. What I discovered is that there exists a bootleg port of Fighting Edition created for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on your region, and it was the first of many bootlegs of fighting games put out into the world using many of the same assets. And there's a ROM of it, so I just had to give it a spin. And boy, do I have some things to say about this piece of shit. Okay, so I just have to address this right off the bat. Remember how I praised the remix of the Power Rangers theme for the Super Nintendo earlier? Well, upon startup, the Genesis bootleg greets you with this. I don't know who in their right minds did this horrible, laissez-faire, barely recognizable bullshit remix of this song, but it's a goddamn atrocity. Who let this slide? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It gets so much worse from here, so I hope you're strapped in. Graphically, it's a shit show. It's like somebody looked at the graphics on the original and said, hey, I wonder how I could take these, redo them as cheaply as possible, and give a horrible green overtone to them. Seriously, just imagine the same, but worse. It has the same everything. Characters, stages, backgrounds, etc. But it's as if it put them through a blender, slapped them back on the screen. I don't know what else to say. It's honestly just gross to look at. But an anomaly is the controls. For some reason, despite how the controls are so much worse, they don't have the delay seen in the Super Nintendo game. But while it may not be as sluggish, it's certainly not any more playable. Honestly, half the time, I don't even think any of my inputs were working. And although the special meter is still on the screen, it's just for show, as it doesn't move or power up or anything. Oh well, at least I can pull off the special moves in this version, even though they're absolutely useless. And I don't know what it is, but the AI is way better than you in this. They move faster, hit harder, and are super aggressive, to the point where I couldn't even take a round off the AI when I played, due to that and the controls. And yes, there are other difficulty settings, but I swear, when I set it to easy, the AI got even more aggressive. I don't know if they were hitting as hard, but it was ridiculous, man. This bootleg is just horrifying. I'm baffled that it even exists, so I guess it makes sense that it's so bad, but why would anyone even want this on the Genesis is beyond me, so avoid this at all costs. Seriously. But all in all, I have to say, the Super Nintendo game is just kinda meh. If you really want to, go ahead and try it out. I can't stop you. You may have a better time than I did with it, especially if you can get to play it on an actual Super Nintendo. Or, if you'd prefer, I do recommend checking out the Gundam Wing Endless Duel game, as it's all in all just a much better game. But for the love of everything, do not play the Genesis bootleg of Fighting Edition. It's not worth your time, energy, or sanity if you even have any. But yeah, check out Endless Duel. Endless Duel is good. Hey there, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, hit that like button, share it with your friends, all that jazz. Subscribe if you want to see more. Click on the left to watch my last review of Digimon Rumble Arena, and over there on the right for something from my gameplay channel. Thanks, please subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.